Good evening, everybody. My name's Alex Edmans, and I'd like to give a warm welcome to everybody for my second Gresham College lecture series, which is called Business Skills for the 21st Century. So I wanted to speak on this topic for two reasons. The first is the acknowledgement that many of the important skills in business, such as time management or public speaking or critical thinking, simply are not taught much at business school. And the second reason for a series such as this is I wanted to appeal it to people outside of business. So no matter what industry you're in or what career you're in, or even if you're no longer working, hopefully many of the topics that I'm going to be speaking about over the course of these 6 lectures will be relevant to you. Now, you might think it's strange for a professor of finance to speak about something like time management. I don't have a PhD in time management. I don't even know whether one exists. So why am I speaking on a topic like this? Well, it's because I recognize that I myself was deficient in many of the areas that I'll be speaking about over the next 6 lectures, that I decided to seriously study them myself, some of them as many as 20 years ago, and read good books about them and look up the research and learn from people far more learned than myself. So I'm going to acknowledge that many of the ideas that I'm going to share over this lecture series are not my own. They're from people far more learned than me. But in the transcript, which will be available after the lecture and also posted on the website, I will always have references to the original research and the original sources so that you can look this up further if you'd like more information. Now, today's topic, time management in the digital age, I think this is one of the biggest challenges in the 21st century. Now, time management has always been a challenge, but it's a particular challenge nowadays for a number of reasons. Well, number one is work has no clear stopping point. So it used to be, if you were plowing fields, once you've plowed the field, you've finished. But here, it could be you're doing a PowerPoint presentation. You can always add additional slides or additional scenarios in your Excel spreadsheet. Similarly, work can be done anywhere. So we think that the idea of remote working is freeing. It frees us from having to be physically present in the office. But a consequence is it means that we're always mentally present in the office, even during evenings and weekends. A third is that email is really convenient. It means that we can send information and receive information, but it also means that we can be contacted by almost anybody, even if we're not the relevant person to address his or her question. And finally, there's almost limitless distractions from things such as email, meaning that it's very difficult just to take breaks or to focus on what's truly important. So what I want to do over the next 45 minutes or so, and allow time for questions at the end, is to present a range of time management frameworks. Now, time management is a very personal issue. So not every single technique here is going to work for every person, right? You have different preferences and different jobs. But what I hope is by presenting a range, then maybe there's going to be 2 or 3 which are going to be working particularly for you. And if you do try these, what I'd encourage is to try them for a period of 2 to 3 weeks. Why? Because a lot of these things involve shifts in long-standing habits, so it might take some time before you can ingrain them. Now, it may be that after 2 or 3 weeks, that habit, that technique is just not for you, and then you might abandon it and move to something different. But I would encourage you to try it for a couple of weeks before making that decision. So what I'm going to start with is, for me, the biggest change and the biggest improvement that I found for my own time management, and it's from, in my opinion, the best business book of all time that I've read, which is a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, which I'm sure some of you know. Now, before I read that book, how did I manage my time? Now, like many of you, I had a to-do list. That's what most people's framework is. Now, the big question is, well, how did I decide which of the things on the to-do list I would do first? Now, one approach is to do the low-hanging fruit first. Do the easy tasks first. Why? Because you can tick them off the to-do list and you can get them done quickly. And maybe if you've got 20 things off your to-do list, you might be able to get 19 of them done pretty efficiently. And it's addictive to do that. It's addictive to cross things off your to-do list. Indeed, studies show that you get a dopamine rush to do that. So we might be addicted to picking the low-hanging fruit. But it means that the more difficult things which might actually be the most crucial, don't actually get done. So you could be efficient, you can think you have a 95% success rate if you cross 19 out of 20 things, but maybe the one thing that you didn't do might have been the most crucial. Now, the second way in which you might decide which of your tasks to do first is that you might choose to do the urgent stuff first. And the urgent stuff is the stuff with the most imminent deadline. And that kind of makes sense. And in fact, that's the time management framework that has been instilled in us since school. Right? You would do a homework deadline, which was due Thursday, but before one which was due, let's say, next Tuesday. And people are very good at meeting those urgent deadlines, but it may well be that something with a long-term deadline, or with no deadline at all, was actually critical to you, but you're never addressing that because you're spending so much time firefighting. So, what transformed me about the Covey framework is he said that instead of stratifying tasks according to what is urgent and what is not urgent, instead, we should stratify tasks according to importance. And we should do, critically, the important stuff first, even if it's not urgent. So it's a no-brainer that urgent and important stuff should be done. But here's the time management challenge. There are things which are important, but which are not urgent, and those are the things that often get deprioritized. And critically, they will often get deprioritized in favor of things that are urgent but not important because we're addicted to meeting deadlines. Because that is the true time management challenge. Right, most of us can meet deadlines. Even when we were immature and at school, we were good at meeting homework deadlines. We can always cram something and do something just to hit a deadline. But the real challenge is how to find time for things which are important, even if they are not urgent. Now you might think, well, that's all well and good, but how do we put this into practice? And so one critical thing is to think about, well, how do we actually stratify what's important versus what's not important? Can I give some examples? And so I think one useful framework that I've learnt is to stratify things into tasks that you want to do and tasks that you have to do. Now, the things that you have to do are things that if you don't do them, somebody else will bring it to your attention. For example, one important thing is to serve an existing client. So maybe if there's a valuation that you're doing for a client, if you don't do that, then she will ask for it if you've not delivered it by your intended delivery date. And so that is clearly urgent because if you don't do it, somebody's going to hold you accountable. But what about something which is not urgent but still important? Well, those are things that you want to do. The things that you want to do versus the things that you have to do are things that are internally driven, where if there is no negative consequence, so if you don't do them, there will be no immediate negative consequence. For example, that might be developing a new client relationship. So if you don't bother to try to develop a new client relationship, there won't be an immediate consequence because you don't have that client yet. There won't be anybody to hold you accountable for not building a relationship with them. And that also applies to learning a new topic or skill. It might be, well, let me think about the implications of artificial intelligence for my business. Again, if you don't spend time doing that, then there's not going to be an immediate consequence. And what I really like about the Covey framework is that we can apply time management not only to work, but also our lives outside of work, because in reality, why are we so busy? It's often not work, but other things. So, another important thing might be, I'd like to run a 10K next year. Now again, nobody's holding you accountable. If you don't do that, there will be no negative consequences. Why? Because that is internally driven. And so the punchline here is we need to prioritize the things that are important to us, the things that we truly want to do, where there is no external source, there's no external pressure. So if we don't prioritize them, nobody is going to make us do them. That's why those are things which we need to hold as important and prioritize first. Now, this is linked to an idea that Covey calls the personal mission statement. And let me back up a bit. So what I've shown you is Covey's habit 3 of his 7 habits of highly effective people, which is first things first, time management. But before habit 3, he has habit 2, which is begin with the end in mind. So what he means by that is you cannot talk about time management unless you know what your objectives are to begin with. Just like you would never set off on a journey without knowing your destination, we can't decide where to put our time without deciding, well, what our goals are, what we'd like to achieve. And so what he said is, well, he suggests you put down a personal mission statement about what you'd like to get out of your career or your life. Now, when I first read this, I thought, well, this seems like psychobabble, right? I'm a serious finance person with no emotions, so I don't talk about things like personal mission statements. And so I ignored this, but then I came back to it a few months later, and then I spent half an hour writing down my personal mission statement, and I realized that that actually saved me a lot of time in the future because it defined for me what was important and made me realize I was spending a lot of time on things that were not at all important to me. So let me give an example from my own statement, and you can find statements just by Googling Covey personal mission statement, some from famous people and some from ordinary citizens. So mine, I defined it professionally as to use rigorous research to influence the practice of business. So I'm a professor, so the first part about using rigorous research is probably not surprising, but I have a very practical passion, which is to use research not just for it to be published in the top journals and sit in a library, but affect the way that people think, which is why I'm really grateful for this Gresham position to give these lectures to the public. And it also means that the research that I like to disseminate is not just going to be about economics and finance, but about the soft skills which are going to be part of this lecture series. So then, if that is my mission statement, if that is my objective, how does that translate into a daily course of action? Well, what Covey then says is he says every day we should define for ourselves a wildly important goal. Now that, again, might seem to be pretty flowery language, like a personal mission statement, but why he calls it a wildly important goal is he says that every day there will be one goal. One, not 2 or 3. Yeah, we love to multitask, but no, there'll be one goal which it's critical for us to achieve, which if we did not achieve it, we would consider the entire day a failure, no matter how many other things we achieved. So one example might be, I actually just wrote up my last Gresham lecture series on purposeful business into a book called Grow the Pie, How Great Companies Deliver Both Purpose and Profit. Now that was not urgent, right? Nobody asked me to write the book. And also books take many years to write, so if I didn't do a chapter that day, there would be no immediate consequence. But that's why I needed to prioritize it. And so it might be one of those days, my wildly important goal was to finish chapter 7, for example. And so I'd start the day working on the chapter, and then during that day, emails might come in. And those emails might be urgent. Those emails might say, please send me the syllabus for the course that you're teaching next term by the end of the day. Or you're giving a talk here next week, please send me your speaker's bio and your slides. They were urgent, they required a response by the end of the day. I would ignore them. I would try to ignore those emails and then plow on and finish that book chapter, even though there were these urgent emails demanding to be responded to. Now, then I may finish the book chapter at 3 p.m., and then I turned to those urgent emails and I got them done by the end of the day. So why did I do that ordering, which was to start with the important stuff and then do the urgent stuff afterwards? Because it might seem equally logical to flip it and do the opposite, which is, let's answer those urgent emails. Why? Because they're urgent. And then once I've done them, I have cleared my plate, and therefore I've got the rest of the day to focus on the book chapter, which is important, without any concern that I've got deadlines to hit. Now, that second idea, it seems logical, but there are at least two problems with that. The first is just that the way that the mind works and your energy levels. So if I was to finish all of those urgent things, and then it was now 3 p.m., and now I was turning to write the book, I'm kind of tired at 3 p.m. And I might think, well, really this is not so urgent, so if I don't get started in the book chapter today, I can just push it through tomorrow. Whereas with the flip model, if I've started with the book chapter, and it takes a lot of cognitive effort to write the chapter, maybe I'm tired at 3 p.m. But then I use the external pressure, the fact that there are those deadlines on the sending of the syllabus and the speaker's bio, to motivate me so that I'm still going to be working at 3 p.m. because I want to hit those deadlines. So the fact that the things that you have to do have external pressures, take advantage of that and use that to motivate you even when you're later on in the day, because you know that you're still going to be working on it even if you're tired. So that's the first advantage. And the second advantage is that if you think of the idea, let me clear my plate by answering all of the urgent things first, and then I can focus on the book chapter. Often it doesn't work like that. Right, you might send the syllabus, and then an email comes back saying, well, actually, it doesn't conform to these formats, and you haven't put in this particular section. Those emails bounce back. So in reality, you might think that you clear your plate, but actually those things end up multiplying, and so it might not be until very late that you actually free yourself. Okay, so the points that I've said so far is we really need discipline to resist the urgency addiction. As I mentioned, every time we click something off a to-do list, we are getting a dopamine rush. That's what's really easy to and tempting to pick these low-hanging fruit. But the low-hanging fruit will naturally get picked later if we start with the important stuff first. Now you might think, well, how do we make sure we don't forget the urgent stuff? Might we just get so engrossed in our book that we forget about it? And what happens if the book ends up taking longer than 3 p.m.? Maybe it actually takes more than a day. Hold that thought. I'm going to come back to that in 2 slides' time. But before that, I want to hammer home on one important point which I've alluded to, but I want to stress a little bit more. And that is the importance of saying no. So, this lecture is called Time Management, but I really should have called it Time Leadership. Why? You may have heard this famous phrase that management is about doing things right. Leadership is about doing the right things. So you have a long to-do list. The best way to shorten it is to cross some things off your to-do list without even doing them. Right? Because one of the worst uses of time is to do something well which need not be done at all. And that's why I think something like a personal mission statement is very valuable, because it will highlight to you what is important, particularly if your personal mission statement is brief, and that's something which Covey recommends. Let's go back to my the professional part of my personal mission statement. It was to use rigorous research to influence the practice of business. Now, in the past, I'd get invitations to speak at academic conferences, and sometimes that might be to give a keynote at an academic conference. And that was really tempting and flattering, and I would accept all of those invitations. And I'd spend a lot of my time flying around the world giving these talks, and just get really burnt out from all of that. But then when I realized, well, actually, that is not part of my mission, to use rigorous research to influence the practice of business. Let me devote my limited time to giving lectures to the public or to practitioners rather than just to other academics. Right, the academic community is really important, and it's really important to build that, but there are other academics who are willing to give those keynotes, and so if I don't do that, right, there's other people who can address that concern. You are not here to solve all of the world's problems, instead to focus on the ones which are most in tune with your sweet spot and your particular skills. Now, I mentioned that was the professional part of my personal mission statement. There's also a personal part of it, which is what I like to do outside work. It's to inspire others to fulfill their potential. How did I apply that? Now, it used to be when I was a professor at Wharton in Philadelphia, I'd be asked to serve on various charities. And obviously, as a finance professor, I would get asked to be a treasurer of various charities. So it might be a homeless charity or a hunger charity. And all of these things I sort of wanted to say yes to, because you want to be a helpful person, you want to give back, and so I might say yes to them. But then I get so burnt out that I would not be good on any of them because I was just spread too thinly. Then I went back to the mission statement of to inspire others to fulfill their potential. And while those things were good in terms of serving as a treasurer, they weren't great because they weren't part of the mission statement. There's no inspirational aspect of it. So I then decided that the only charitable thing that I was going to devote meaningful time to was to be the head running coach of the American Cancer Society. So if people were running marathons or half marathons to raise money for cancer, I would coach them. That had that inspiring aspect to it, and so that was something much better in my sweet spot. I think that's important because it's very difficult to say no. So somebody like me, it's difficult because I get excited by most things. I find most things to be interesting. But because we are so busy, right, there's a lot of things which are good, which are interesting. But here the point that good is the enemy of great. If we accept a lot of good things, which sound good but are not in our sweet spot, then we're actually not spending time with the great things. So there was a talk by Derek Sivers who says there's no more yes. It's either hell yeah or no. So why he says this is that, right, we've got so many demands in our time that if something is a moderate yes, an 8 out of 10 task for us, that's not good enough. Only the 9s and 10s should we be doing. Only the hell yeahs are really important. I've also heard of this being known as the Spice Girls strategy. So if you know the lyrics of the song, right, it's not what you want, but what you really, really want. So we want to spend our time on those things because there's so many things that we would like to do. Only the things which are in the sweet spot are important. One podcast I listen to, which I recommend, is by Craig Gresham on leadership. He has the phrase, to do things that no one else is doing, you have to not do things that everyone else is doing. So if I'm going to be able to learn, say, mental and physical wellness to give the Gresham lecture in a couple of months' time on that, and read up on the neuroscience of exercise, I need to take time away from giving these academic conferences to say no to these other things. And one final point before I move on to the analogy is what I learned to be the next Tuesday rule. So often we will accept advance commitments. Let's say I might accept a commitment to speak somewhere next March, thinking my calendar is free next March. However, a good idea is the next Tuesday rule, which is to ask ourselves, would we accept that invitation if we had to do it next Tuesday? Now, why is that useful? Because most likely, your next Tuesday probably is busy, right? Many people here are busy. It's going to be full. Now, if I was to project myself to March, yes, it looks that my diary is clear at the moment, but fast forwarding to 1 week before the talk that I'm going to accept in March, I'm probably going to be just as busy then as I am now. So this idea of thinking, well, if I was to do it next Tuesday, would I still want to do it? And if my answer was no, because I'm busy with other things, then probably I shouldn't accept it in March either. I mentioned there was one analogy at the bottom of the page, and if you're reading it, you might think, what does this have to do with anything? I'm talking about catching monkeys. So bear with me while I explain this. So let's say you're in like a foreign country and you want to catch a monkey. What would you do? So what you can do is you can take a coconut, you can drill a hole into the coconut, and you can pour some sweet, sticky rice into the coconut. So the monkey smells the sticky rice, the monkey comes along, and the monkey puts his hand into the coconut and grabs the sticky rice. But you've been kind of cunning here, because you've made the hole so small that the palm can go in, but the fist, once he's grabbed the rice, cannot get out. So the monkey is trapped, and the hunter comes and collects the monkey. But the monkey is not trapped. The monkey could have chosen to let go of that sticky rice and to walk away. So the monkey had chosen to be trapped. So the question for myself when I first heard this analogy is, what is your sticky rice? What are the things that you're grabbing and holding on to which are actually constraining you and meaning that you're so busy and so stressed, which you could actually choose to get rid of? And for me, there were many things that were my sticky rice. It was accepting any volunteer opportunity with all of these charities. I thought that I was being a nice person, but in fact, my sticky rice was to be perceived as being a nice person because I was seen as somebody who would take all of those charitable positions. Or it might be, my sticky rice was I was always known to be really responsive to email. So it might be that even on a Saturday, when I was having a restaurant dinner with my friends, I would be rude and get out my iPhone and reply to some emails because my sticky rice was I wanted to keep up my reputation of being responsive. And so when I realized that, there's so many things which made me burnt out, which I thought that I had to do, when in fact I chose to do it. And actually this language really does change your perspective, because when I would say, I have to fly and give this conference talk here, and I have to reply to these emails, and I have to go to this charity meeting, if I actually change my language to I choose to do this talk, and I choose to serve on this charity board, and I think, well, do I really want to do that? Is that the correct choice? And that's what led to me actually saying no to many things and then becoming much freer. So, the final topic on this no is how to say no, because that again seems to make a lot of sense, but how do you actually do it? It's hard to say no to your friend. It's hard to say no to your boss, particularly if you're a junior person. So there's a couple of things I'd say. So the first is don't feel guilty about saying no, because sometimes requests can be speculative. As I mentioned email, one of the challenges with email is that people can email requests to lots and lots of people, even if you're not the appropriate person. And it's related to that, yes might not be the best answer for them. Which I think is surprising, right? Why would they be happy with a no? Don't they want a yes? But sometimes it might not be you're the best person to deal with their request. So somebody might come to me and say, can you provide me with feedback on my business plan? Because I'm a business professor. But actually, I have very little expertise in small businesses and entrepreneurship, or my expertise is with large public companies. Or it might be a friend who's coming to town and says, can you meet with me? I'd love to catch up. But maybe if you're really busy and then you end up meeting your friend and then you end up being physically present but mentally absent because you actually don't want to be in that meeting because there's so many other things you'd want to do, say no. That's actually kinder for the friend. Now, what about to bosses? Well, sometimes the boss might just not be aware of all of the other things on your plate. Maybe you're doing work for other bosses, or of how long something takes. So there was a time when I was at Morgan Stanley as a junior analyst where the boss asked me to do an extra analysis. So for those of you in the industry, you sometimes do something known as comparable companies, where I was comparing my company with many, many others. And the boss said, well, can you add a 16th company to this? We've already got 15. And I just had to say to him, well, actually, if I was to do this, it would change all of these different analyses which feed into something, which feed into something else. And he said, I just didn't know that. I didn't know that it would be so difficult to do this. Thank you for telling me. You're right. We probably don't need to do that. And this is something that I also teach, this lecture I teach at London Business School to my master's students. And I have them an assignment at the end where the students give me their reflections on what they learned from it. And one student came up with this reflection from his own working experience, which he gave me permission to share. And why I'm sharing this is this tries to get around the perception that you can never say no because you're in a hierarchical structure. The boss wants you to always say yes. What he wrote was, during my internship, I was extremely filled with an unbelievable amount of work, and my manager came to me and asked me, hey, you think you can do this for me? I was afraid of saying no. Of course, as an intern, he wants to get a full-time job. So I thought to myself, probably I can squeeze that into my schedule. It doesn't seem a big thing anyway. And I said yes. But as it turned out, the things already at my hand all had very tight schedules. So I had to push off my manager's task over and over again. After some time, he just messaged me, "I've done that myself, so you don't need to do it now." Terrified, I went to my manager to apologize. He said, "No worries. I'm not faulting you on this. I know you're not experienced. But think about it. It did not really matter who was doing this thing. It did not have to be you. I could have done it. The other associate could have done it. And we all had time. What really mattered was that this piece of task gets done on time. Next time when your schedule is really tight, tell me you cannot do it. I will find someone else to put on this task. Or I can do it myself. And that is absolutely fine. What is not fine is if you take on the task knowing you probably do not have enough time and end up not doing it. This slows down the whole group and is not cool. I think there's many interesting takeaways from that. The first is the idea that yes might not be the best answer for them. You might think, okay, the boss asked you to do something, he or she wants a yes. Here was clearly a case where it wasn't. And the second point was it echoes something I alluded to earlier, that you are not here to solve all of the world's problems. I did not need to accept every single charitable request because there's others who could serve on those committees. And similarly, the boss said there's other associates who could have done it, or he or she could have done it themselves. Okay, so don't feel guilty. Then how do we say no? So one approach is to offer an alternative. So that alternative might be another person. So sometimes students will come to me and ask me for career advice, and they'll say, well, actually, the Career Centre, their job is to give advice. That's what they're specialised in. That's what they do every time. They have much more expertise on that than me, who focuses on teaching and research. But I think even better than that, because you don't want to burden too many other people, is to offer other resources. So I get sometimes asked, can I have a meeting to talk about your research? And I say, thank you very much for your interest in my research. I really appreciate it. What I've done, though, is I've tried to make my research already accessible to the general public with, say, the Gresham lecture series of last year. Here are the videos, and if you don't have time to read the videos, here are the transcripts. And so those other resources are useful. And the final thing is just to keep the response short and sweet. So if you over-respond, that implies that you might not be confident about your reason, and sometimes your reasons can be challenged, especially your weakest argument. So here is something that I got, maybe a slide is missing, but on the slide it said that the following. It's from a book called The Life-Changing Power of No by Laura Tong. And it was about somebody asking you to meet up for a drink. And I'm trying to remember it because it's just not on the slide, and I apologize. It said, well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm afraid I have to be protective of my own downtime. You know how it is to get an hour for yourself. So I'm afraid I can't accept this offer, but I appreciate you asking. And that's just a respectful way, just to say no. And so it's not about the person, but I'm just protective of my own downtime. That's a policy that I'm having, and it's not specific to you, the person who's asking me. Okay, so we've done the how to say no. Now let me go back to something that I alluded to earlier, but said wait 2 slides time before I finish it. And that's the idea of making sure that we still do the urgent stuff. So let me back up and give you a reminder of where we were. I said, start with the important. That might be writing my book chapter. And then if you get urgent requests, just ignore them and do them at the end of the day when you have finished the important thing. Okay, that all works well if things go to plan and you finish the book chapter by 3 p.m. But in reality, things don't go to plan. And sometimes urgent things happen which are unexpected. So here is a framework that I learned from, I think it was a book called Getting Things Done by David Allen, about filing away tasks. So what he suggests is that when emails come in, you should file them away into subfolders which are called maybe today or this week. So if I had an email which was urgent, I needed to reply to that by the end of the day, I would file it into the subfolder called today. So why do I want to do that? Well, you might think, well, why don't I just keep it in my inbox and then just reply to that at the end of the day when I finish the book chapter. Well, the problem is that when it's in your inbox, it just distracts your attention. You are always seeing it in your inbox every time you go to Outlook, and you always have in the back of your mind, I need to make sure that I reply to it today. And that takes mental energy. We often think about time management, but there's also the concept of bandwidth management, and there's a book about that which I refer to in the transcript. And indeed, there was a famous study which does the following. It gives some people some cookies in front of them, and it tells the students, don't eat the cookies. And then it gets the students to do some difficult problems. And they don't do well on those problems. Then there's a control group where you're giving them radishes, and you tell them, don't eat those radishes. And then you give them the problems, and they're able to do the problems fine. And so here's the problem, here's the challenge, is that the mental energy that it takes for you not to eat the cookies means that you can't solve the problems. And similarly here, the mental energy it takes for you to resist replying to that email. Remember, replying to emails is addictive. It gives you a dopamine rush. That means that when you're trying to do the important thing, like the book chapter, you're not going to finish it. So if you put it into the Today subfolder, it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and because you know it's in your Today folder, you know that you are going to get it done on that day because you're going to come back to it. And so then what I might do is that at 3 p.m., or it might change, maybe it might be 2 p.m. if I know that I've got lots of things in my Today folder, I will go to that folder, maybe even if I haven't finished the book, and then start going through all of the things that I need to do by the end of the day. Because it's in that folder, I'm not going to forget about it, I start clearing that out later on. And you can experiment with this and have variations. You can have a this week folder. Maybe some of you work in really high-stress careers where you can't even wait until the end of the day. But you could have a subfolder called This Morning, where you start going through that at 10:30 a.m. And that will still buy you 9 to 10:30, a good 90 minutes of work. Right? How often do we get 90 minutes to focus on one thing? Quite rarely. But you can focus on that for 90 minutes before getting to the This Morning folder. Now, the one tip that I would say, if you were to implement this, is to be very stringent upon what you would put in your Today folder versus the This Week folder. So the Today folder should have things which absolutely need to be done today. I would sometimes have wishful thinking. I would put some urgent things due today, and then other things which I didn't need to do until the end of the week, but I hoped I would do today. And so when I went to the Today folder at 3 p.m. or whatever, I'd realize I don't actually need to do all of them. So I do the truly urgent stuff, but keep some stuff in the Today folder because I was tired and actually I didn't need to do it by the end of the day. But that's a really bad habit because this only works if you get into the habit of always knowing that you need to clear the Today folder at the end of each day. So the better thing is if there is something which isn't that urgent, put it in the This Week folder. If you're lucky, if you've started clearing out, you've emptied the Today subfolder, start with the This Week thing, but don't put things in Today unless they actually need to be done on that day. Now, out of everything I'm going to tell you today, perhaps this next little bullet point is the one thing which gives you the most bang for buck in terms of how many emails that will save you. That is emails which come from mailing lists. Now, I'm subscribed to a lot of mailing lists that I want to be subscribed to. They might be the Financial Times or the Economist, or they might be from shopping websites that I buy regularly from. Now, the thing about all of those emails is they do not need a response. When it's The Economist, I'm sort of just reading it and being receptive. And they're often all about the same thing. So if I was to look at my Economist or FT emails, it's probably going to be about Brexit, Brexit, Brexit at the end of today. So all of those emails, because they're from mailing lists, they have the word unsubscribe in them. Now, I don't want to unsubscribe. I want to receive those emails. But what I can do is I can go to Outlook, I can go to File, Manage Rules and Alerts, to move any message with the word unsubscribe into a subfolder, which I call mailing lists, and it marks it as read. So what is great about that is it saves probably about 50 emails in my inbox. By the end of the day, I've probably got about 50 there. And it never even needs to go into my inbox, so I never need to spend time filing it away. It automatically gets dumped into that folder. And then at the end of the day, even if I'm really tired, let's say I've gone out for a work dinner, I can go through those emails really quickly because none of them really need a reply, and many of them are about the same thing. If they're particular like news emails, they're all covering the same news. So that saves lots and lots of time because I can batch process 50 emails, maybe in 5 minutes. And that's a general point, which is in the final bullet points here, the idea of batch processing email. So when I first got a BlackBerry, I loved to receive email. And so I used to have the vibration that I would get every time I got a new email. So it'd be I work on something, a new email comes in, I'd reply to the email because I was clinging onto my sticky rice of being known to be responsive. Then I go back to my work, another email comes in, reply to that, go back to work. But there are studies quoted in the transcript showing that when you do that, you lose a lot of time switching from task to task. Because when you switch gears back, you've forgotten where you were, the flow that you're in, and so that's very unproductive. So instead, a much better approach is to work offline and batch process email. So what do I mean by this? Well, if I'm working and if I'm using my computer, for example, I might completely close my Outlook and then work on the book chapter, and then after a certain period of time, then go back to all my emails. And maybe then 20 emails have accumulated, but I can go through all those 20 emails in one go. That's much better than interrupting myself 20 individual times. And that's particularly powerful when I use an internet blocker. So I use a program called Freedom, which blocks the internet for a pre-specified period. So let's say 25 minutes to be conservative. So why is it good to do that? You might think, well, why don't I just block the internet, not check my email until I finish this task? Well, sometimes the task might be open-ended. It might take you 1.5 hours to write your covering letter for a job application. And the human mind can't focus for 1.5 hours often. Whereas if there is a finite end period, let's say 25 minutes, you can focus for that time. Let me use an analogy. So, for example, let's say your personal trainer asks you to do a plank. Hopefully, she won't ask you to do it for 25 minutes. That would be quite cruel. But let's say she asks you to do it for 1 minute. Now, after 50 seconds, you're probably really feeling it, but you know that there's the end point, and you can probably last those final 10 seconds. Whereas if she said, hold a plank until I tell you to stop, that is open-ended, and you're probably going to give up much earlier than you would do. And so the analogy here is, let's say I've set the freedom to block the internet for 25 minutes. Maybe after 20 minutes, I'm sort of getting antsy. I want my distraction. I want to check the email. I want to check the football scores or whatever. But I know that in 5 minutes' time, I'm going to be able to have that distraction. So I will work for those additional 5 minutes. There's a clear endpoint, and that makes me much more focused during that time. And what is really interesting is actually when I put on the freedom blocker and when I click go, actually mentally, my mind just feels lighter. And it's strange, but I think it's because I know that I'm going to have the next 25 minutes without any external pressure, without needing to reply to anything. And that's why just physically something changes in my mind when I do this. And so I think this is something which is really powerful. Okay, so that was dealing with email on your computer. But what about mobile devices, which I think is really important? And so this is the idea of mindfulness, which again might think, which sometimes has some misperceptions. It's something which is actually scientifically studied, which is the idea that if you are always distracting yourself, always needing to check email, then your brain actually rewires itself that you cannot focus. go back to the plank analogy. If you're able to hold a plank, your muscles actually form, your muscles get stronger, so that you're able to hold a plank for longer. And similarly, if you are able to concentrate, your mental, quote, muscles change so that you are able to focus for longer and not be distracted. So when you teach yourself to go these periods of time without any distraction, that curbs your distraction for email and you get less addicted to it, you're able to focus. And why I use the addiction analogy is actually checking email is often like gambling. So why do I say that? Well, most emails suck. Right? Most emails might be an email from your boss asking you to do work. There's stuff which asks you to do things, and that's why you like to reply to an email, because an email is a task which you have to do something. However, you still like checking email, because even though 90% of emails impose a burden on you, they tell you to do something, you long for that email, which might be from a friend who you've not been in contact with for a while. Or maybe it's from a headhunter giving you the opportunity to move to a different company. And it's for those lottery-like things. That's why we always want to check email. When the buzz goes off, we want to see whether we've won the lottery. And so that's why one of the solutions to this is to try to just wean ourselves off it. And one of the solutions I suggested is just to block the internet so that we are not trying to win the lottery. Now, I've told you how you catch monkeys. How do Eskimos catch wolves? So, here's another analogy. So, what they do is they will take a razor blade, they will cut their arm with a razor blade, they will allow the blood to drip onto some ice, and they'll bury the razor blade inside that ice. So the wolf comes along, the wolf smells the blood, and the wolf starts licking the blood. The wolf starts licking, and the tongue goes numb because of the ice. Keeps licking, and then cuts into the razor blade, but the wolf doesn't notice it. And so the wolf just dies because the tongue cuts the blade and bleeds out. So what does that have to do for anything? So this was indeed my approach to email previously, is that this was just such a habit to me to check email at all occasions that I was numb to it. It could be, as I mentioned, I'd be on a restaurant meal, and if the conversation just got boring or just a topic I wasn't so interested in, I would just get out my email and check it. It would be that in an elevator, if it took sort of 10 seconds to go up to the 4th floor, I would get out my phone and start checking my email. And I think I was being really productive. That is great time management. I'm using those 10 seconds to kill a couple of emails. And I am saving those 10 seconds. But what I was doing to my brain in terms of creating my craving for distraction was actually far worse than those 10 seconds. It meant that when I was sitting down and actually trying to do some work, I was not able to focus. So what is the solution that I ended up coming up with? So I actually ended up taking email completely off my phone. I do not have my email at all. Now you might think, well, that seems really crazy and really bad time management. Because aren't there so many times where, like, let's say I'm on a tube, where I could be just checking my email and saving myself time later? Well, what I do have is I do have an iPad. And on my iPad, I still have email. So why is it good to have email on the iPad? That now allows me to still save time. If I've got time between meetings or if I've got time on the tube, I can still kill those emails. But it stops the mindless checking. I cannot suddenly whip out my iPad in a restaurant meal. That would be really rude. And I can't suddenly whip out my iPad when I'm going up the elevator. So it only means that I'm actually getting up and checking up the email when I've got serious time that I can actually compose some replies to it. And so this is part of a general idea, which I call a reverse pilot. So what is a pilot? A pilot is if you try something new for the first time, and you see if it works, and if it works, you can continue with it. Now, the reverse pilot is the opposite. Let's stop doing something. And if you stop doing something, and there's no negative consequences, keep stopping doing it. So I thought, well, if I take your email off my phone, I'm going to be just much less responsive, and people are going to be angry with me, and maybe I'm going to have so many emails left at the end of the day because I've not checked them in the elevator. But I actually realized, well, there's no negative consequences of that. And similarly, what else I removed? I removed LinkedIn and I removed Twitter. Those are things which have good business purposes. I will advertise my Gresham lectures on LinkedIn and Twitter, but I realized that I was also wasting a lot of time on them. But I still have them on my iPad, and so if I've got some serious time, I can still send out the advertisements on the iPad. I want to make sure I allow time for questions, so let me see how I'm going to manage my time for the rest of the lecture well. Let me just go to the final bullet point here. Actually, on the reverse pilot, and again, we can think about this in other ways, not just stopping email, but anything else which is causing you to hold on to the sticky rice. Maybe for me it was to stop giving those academic conferences. I might have thought, well, maybe my academic visibility might fall if I stop doing this, but I realized that I can not do those every conference and still my work might be known. So here's the final thing I'm going to mention. So some of you will have heard of Dan Ariely, who's a great behavioral economist. He's written books like Predictably Irrational and given great TED Talks. And we were both speaking at a conference in behavioral economics a couple of years ago, and he talked about how he was doing an experiment to encourage people to save in Kenya. And he ran this experiment. He does field experiments. And there were three things that he offered as interventions. Number one was at the end of the month, he would boost your savings by 20%. Number two is he would send he'd send text messages signed by the person's children to remind them to save. It might be, dear mummy or dear daddy, please make sure that you save this week so that I can go to college. Signed, the name of the kids. The third was he gave you a coin, and you, at the end of the day, you had to scratch either yes or no, according to whether you'd saved or not. So he asked us, which of those three methodologies did we think was most effective? And most people thought one or two. Right, the economists thought 20%, that's a huge incentive. The ones with a heart would have thought that the emails from the text from the children would have the effect. But actually the answer was number three. And the idea here is that things are really different when you keep score. That's why things such as Fitbits and tracking 10,000 steps, that affects people's behavior. Even though there's no financial consequences of it, you're the only person who sees your steps. And similarly, if you're to be running on a treadmill or rowing on the rowing machine, you're going to be working much harder if you can see the distance than if you couldn't. So what he suggests is for some of these things to instill good habits is the idea of keeping score. So I have on my bedroom wall a chart where at the end of each day, I need to write down how many times I've picked up my phone and for how long I've spent on screen time. That's immediately recorded with the Apple Screen Time app. There's other apps like Moment which can do this. And that does change my behavior, right? It sort of makes me stop and decide not to take up my phone mindlessly, because I know that if I do, I'm going to have to write down a really bad number at the end, in the same way that people with a Fitbit might think, well, let me do these extra steps so I can hit my 10,000 target. These might seem small things, but people act differently when you're keeping score. And that can be applied to many other things. So if you were to do my idea earlier of blocking the internet for 25 minutes at a time, and then taking breaks, maybe you might want to record how many blocks of 25 minutes you did on that day. Or maybe, I'm previewing to some of my later talks, let's say implementing an exercise schedule, then it might be that you're just going to tick or cross whether you exercised on that particular day. So there's many more things that I didn't have time for today on group time management. These are covered in the transcript. But let me just pause here and thank everyone for their attention and just invite questions. And the questions can indeed be skeptical ones. If you think, well, does this indeed work? What are the problems with this? Or are there other things that you hope that I would have covered that I didn't? I'd love to hear your questions. Thanks.